All right, welcome back. Now we move on to the next session, nature, positive economy, and finance. Till now, you have got the idea that the nature and climate shouldn't be separated. It needs to be discussed together. It's a very united system. The planet system is united. But how we can really do justice to our natural system. So this session is really discuss that issue. And I would like to introduce the panelists, Charles Goddard, Editorial Director, Economist Impact, Hiroyuki Isono, President and Group CEO of OG Holding Corporation, Miri Takoko, Chief Executive, Pacific Whale Fund. This panel discussion will be chaired and moderated by Martin Stuchtey, President, the Landbanking Group. So now, floor is all yours.
Thank you, Naoko. Can I be heard? Now I can be heard. Thanks a lot, Naoko. We were very much looking forward to this. Thank you for your attendance, and thank you for your interest in the nature, positive economy, and finance. Could it be that we finally have to put money back into nature, and that this is a question that we finally can't walk away from anymore? We had two choices how to run this. One would have been a set of presentations, and the other one would have been a real conversation amongst us where we jointly wrestle with what might well be the toughest and the most rewarding challenge of this time. And we decided to go for a conversation, and also happen to think it's a good way to pull the strengths of the panel that the team has assembled. We have a distinguished nature leader, but who has always been reaching out to business and finance. We have a distinguished business leader who has a track record of having reached out to nature. And we have a distinguished observer and traveler who has always been a bridge between those two worlds. And so let's make sure we actually make something out of it. And we have you as an audience, and to the best of my abilities, I will look around, and if I see anyone sitting on the edge of his or her chair, then I will try to bring you into the conversation. So we have Miri Takoko. You have been quickly introduced. You're the chief executive of the Pacific Whale Fund, which is as interesting as anything can be in this space, and we are really curious to listen to your story. You are a very influential voice for the ocean. You have a long history. You were with Conservation International, who many of you know. You were with the Fiji Ministry, and you have always taken particularly focus on how to bring indigenous communities and communities at large into this conversation, which is something that we might not have done well in the past. We have Hiroyuki Isono. You are the president and CEO of the OG Holdings Group, which is one of the largest forest owners and clearly one of the largest pulp and paper players. You have been driving a strong agenda towards turning all of your product circular, regenerative, but also looking upstream. You are part of a group that wants to change the way we look at forest management, and you are increasingly looking at this as something that is constitutive to your business. And then we have Charles Goddard, and we go back a long way. You are the editorial director of the Economist group, and you are the one who is thinking about the new stuff. Where are those new societal arenas, those initiatives, anything from cancer to antimicrobial resistance to longevity, but also to sustainability in oceans, and it's oceans and nature, which particularly took your heart, and you are therefore also the executive director of the Economist World Ocean Summit, where some of you in this room I know have been. Now, myself, as a host, I'm sort of, perhaps that's not so important, but quickly, because it helps me get into the conversation. I'm a geologist, and I studied geology, and I studied business. And there are many things you remember from your study days. In geology, I remember that we not only do have a shared climate history, that's what Johan talked about, we also have a shared biological history. In geology and paleontology, you learn how we had biodiversity breakdowns, the last one 60 million years ago, and you can actually stand at the rock formation and you can actually see where, along which strata that really happened. What we are currently seeing is at least as big in order of magnitude such an event, in terms of magnitude and in terms of speed. And it's so hard to reconcile a 60 million year event with our lives where we make daily decisions. These things are so different in magnitude. How do we get this into the calculation? So that's one framing for today. And the other framing for today is when it comes to my business background, one of the things that I remember that we've always been taught that that value is set by price and that price is set by markets. And it's so evident now how much value comes from this thing that we are discussing here, nature, and how we are unable to give it a price. What's wrong deeper down in the engine room of the economy? And Naoko, I know that is something that a question that you are very fond of. And it might be because you come from Japan. Because the second thing I remember from my business studies, we had the head of the German central bank there, it was in the 90s, and he told us, look at Japan. This is the one country that really is strategic and long-term in the way it thinks about its competitiveness. And so this is not a judgment of where we are on the sustainability agenda, but it might be a possible opening. Could it be that in the future, that in this century, those countries and those companies are more competitive, that actually are well protected from the risks of nature? We saw a quintupling of prices in cocoa. We might see a massive reduction in our global coffee harvest. We haven't had in Europe any oranges from the Mediterranean. You can't have home insurances in California anymore. Slovenia, which is a country where Guido, one of our good friends, comes from, they have an annual budget, a government budget of 16 billion. And they had nature-related damages of 3 billion last year. That's about 20% of your opportunity gone, which should go into education and now goes into repairs. So could it be that in such a world, a company and a country and an economy that actually takes this thing serious is also more competitive? That's very much the framing for this conversation. And let me start with you, Charles Goddard. You've done so many things. There must be a reason why you decided that nature and particularly the ocean is so important. Talk a bit about your journey, and then also talk about how that conversation has changed over the year, for good or bad. Where are we on the journey?
Martin, thank you very much indeed, and it's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Professor Naoki, for inviting me along. Usually I'm in that chair, not in this chair. I'm usually the moderator, so and Martin is one of the many people I've moderated, but always one of the most interesting people I've moderated. I mean, our ocean journey, and of course we have many journeys at The Economist, but ocean is one of our favorite issues and one of our favorite journeys. I think the editor-in-chief of The Economist said, we use the tools of economics in order to address pressing global public policy issues, and of course the ocean is a vital, pressing public policy issue. And I was really interested to hear Professor Johan Rockström's comments earlier today. So many of those involved the ocean, or in some way tangentially the hydrosphere, and indeed the cryosphere, the ice systems. And that, to me, was really important because one of the things that I feel continues to be a missing element in our own discussions in the ocean is a sense in the business community, a sense in the financial community that the oceans are kind of out there. They're not really of great consequence to us. They're not, except for those industries that are directly involved in the ocean, fisheries, shipping, and a few others, that the ocean isn't really of great consequence to us. And I think, we clearly, listening to Johan Rockström earlier, we clearly now see that a number of planetary boundaries have ocean-related issues connected to them, that those issues like ocean acidification, like the deoxygenation of the ocean, including issues related to excessive nitrogen going into the ocean from agriculture, from sewage, that the biodiversity loss in the ocean largely, but not solely created by climate change-related issues, but also by excessive extractions from the ocean, from living, particularly living organisms, fishing particularly. Those are all creating a crisis in the ocean at this particular point in time. Added to that, humans have our own industrialization of the ocean, which has happened again across the last 50 to 60 years. And we continue to think of the ocean as this effective growth engine for our economies, and not always in a sustainable way, I think. In fact, mostly in a relatively unsustainable manner. So we're thinking about what we can do for bioprospecting. There's, of course, this big debate and discussion about deep-sea mining. We continue to think of how we can increase growth through aquaculture and through a range of other sort of economic activities, some of them new, some of them old, in the ocean. And that sustainability quite often is a secondary consideration in those questions. And why does it matter? Why does the ocean actually matter? Well, I think we heard earlier today that, it's a vital Earth system. It creates 50% of the oxygen we breathe. It sequesters carbon dioxide. 30% of all of the excess carbon dioxide we have in the atmosphere goes into the ocean. 90% of the heat. I won't go into all of the figures, but these are vital. So the ocean is a vital and essential Earth system, allowing us to live in the space that we need to live in. And I think that's poorly appreciated. I think it's also poorly appreciated from a much more systemic point of view, and I'll end here, from a much more systemic point of view, that the ocean isn't just a saltwater body. It's actually connected, importantly, to freshwater and to the cryosphere. And actually, this hydrosphere is, and to the atmosphere, to atmospheric rivers of water that are vital to the way in which this planet stays within its natural boundaries. And that, I think, is something that we don't appreciate. And secondly, I think we do look at the ocean as a system that shapes, we don't look at the ocean as a system that shapes the entire planet and shapes what we do. And I think our narrow definition of what activity in the ocean is needs to be, in some ways, reframed, and nature is a vital part of that reframing.
Last time when we met Charles, we thought we were all getting together around a really positive story. And when we say ocean, of course, we mean nature at large, where the ocean is our best friend when it comes to mitigating and to regulating climate effect. That was Johan's story earlier this morning, where we said it could be that source of all the green energy that we need. It could be the provider of livelihoods. So a very positive story, an economic story around the ocean. And we would also say that increasingly the industry will have incentives on land to behave differently. And it was the plastic conversation that brought us together a couple of years ago. And we thought this is the beginning of a reinterpretation of what it could be. In the meantime, if we are honest, and we've decided, we had a coffee, all of us, a moment ago, we decided to end this really on a high note, but we quickly need to have one moment where we are acknowledging the realities of today. That's not where we currently are. There's more. We are back to looking at the ocean as a source of offshore oil production, now even metal mining, and all of that has to do, A, because these resources are still traded so high, but secondly, because the ocean is still traded at zero. So is there a bit of reflection what we got wrong, how we'd have to tell the story differently as we go deeper, before we go deeper into the economics of nature? What have we learned, how not to tell the story?
I think it's such an important point. I mean, the first thing is that we still haven't appreciated the ocean as a natural asset that we all share. I think that's one of the vital points here. I mean, it's fascinating to me, and you mentioned this kind of not reversal, but this backtracking that we have around things like fossil fuel extraction and plastics and a whole range of other things. It was a fascinating picture that I saw on the release of the Australian government's National Ocean Plan of all of the key ministers, including the Prime Minister, standing, looking over the Great Barrier Reef. And of course, we all know that the Great Barrier Reef is dying. And on the one hand, you know, they're creating this National Ocean Action Plan. On the other hand, they're ensuring that the fossil fuel industry and continued extraction around oil and gas continues in Australia and continues to have significant investment in it. And of course, some of that is about natural gas coming to Japan and coming Australia's largest market, of course. And I think the contradictions are so evident in this. And I think one of the primary sort of issues that prevents us really from thinking about the ocean in the right way is that we don't really think of it as an asset, as a natural asset that has a value, as Martin was saying, and that one that we need to understand how to map that value in such a way that financial institutions and corporates and indeed governments and policymakers can begin to shift their behavior and shift their investment.
Takoko, you are one of the leading global asset managers. That's how we will introduce you in 10 years' time, because you are a steward for a big part of the planet. Currently, we are not yet calling you this. Currently, you are the chief executive of the Pacific Whale Fund. But that actually brings you close to one of those assets we all need. Tell us a bit about your journey. You've done so much. It's a very, very rich journey, and grab her afterwards, please. And why you ended up with Pacific Whale Fund, because it also seems to be that many of the learnings and conclusions of your work are enshrined in that in the fund.
Uia mai ko e whakahuati ake ko waite whare nei e. Ko te kani, ko waite te ko kairunga, ko pai kea, ko pai kea. Thank you for the question, but let me first say what an honour and privilege it is to be here amongst you all. This is my first time to Japan, and it's truly an amazing conference to be part of and an amazing culture to experience. I want to share firstly a little bit about my background. I am Polynesian, I'm Māori from New Zealand. For us, the oceans is our mother, and that's how we see the world. And my background is not only as a conservationist, but as someone that works across many disciplines to implant this value for nature, for the oceans. Oceans give life on this planet. Scientists may explain that in terms of the role our oceans play to, in terms of the climate, as a climate regulator. Of course, the nourishment the oceans provide. A lot of the Pacific Ocean in particular, where I'm from, of course, is one of the most important, if not the most important ocean in the world. And that's how we all connect. Your people here in Japan and my people are all part of this great ocean, Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, the Pacific Ocean. So it's important that I acknowledge that. One thing that I have also noticed as I've travelled all across the world is the Pacific Ocean is often forgotten. People forget that the Pacific Ocean covers 30% of the surface of this planet. 25% of all human-induced emissions are actually stored within the Pacific Ocean. So arguably the Pacific Ocean is just as important, or if not more, than the Amazon rainforest. And not a lot of scientists talk about that. If you equate this into tonnes of carbon, that represents 2.5 billion tonnes of carbon. So my work is to really look at how do we establish a nature market for the Pacific Ocean based on the right values, and for me the values are entrenched in culture. Values are not entrenched in how much monetary gain we can create from our ocean assets. I think, being an Indigenous person, we bring this beautiful perspective, but a very practical perspective also. I am the founder of the Hinemona Halo project. It's the first nature project of its kind in New Zealand. It is focused largely on our ocean assets, blue carbon assets, but also includes terrestrial ecosystems like forests. Why? Because we see all of the biodiversity, all of these living systems as connected. The difficulty that we face in a world with climate change and all the challenges that brings, including biodiversity loss, is how we're going to transform this economic system to value the things that my people have always valued. And that, for me, means that we now have to talk the language of markets. So my people, who see nature as for its intangible qualities, must now really think about how we can tangibly create ways and pathways for the markets to be able to transition. So I'm, one of the few Indigenous people who have been promoting nature markets because really, in some ways, it's at odds with our values. But as Johan rightly pointed out, we have 5 to 10 years to fix this problem. And so the Pacific Whale Fund has really been created as a mega solution that will seek to double the capacity of the Pacific Ocean to store carbon. The way we intend to do that is, in fact, by bringing back the great whales of the Pacific. In my country, we have receipts for over 900,000 whales that were taken out of our oceans. Now that equates to 30 billion tonnes. Sorry, I'm getting this wrong. Just under 3 billion tonnes of carbon that was extracted from our oceans, which with huge implications for biodiversity loss that we continue to be experiencing today. So our plan is really to restore 1 million whales back to our oceans. In doing so, we will also restore the food web. And I'd like to talk more about our plan to do so, but maybe in the next series of questions, I'll be able to outline how we intend to achieve this strategy. Not just for my people in New Zealand, but for every country that is part of the Pacific. Kia ora.
Yeah, and it's probably both ways round, in the same way that your community needs to learn what value is to the economy. I think we need to learn what intrinsic value is, because we've lost that sense a lot. And if there's anything that keeps this conversation together, is that we need a new conception of wealth altogether, because we are not so sure anymore. So sometimes we've been using this number, 75% of people have nature as a screensaver. Just think of that. Isn't that interesting? How our intuitive, there must be a reason for it, how our intuitive sense for wealth is so disjoined from our economic sense, where in any plan to get into oil production in Namibia now, to get back to our conversation from this morning, Guido, the ocean itself is a zero in that complex conversation. Now, Isono-san, we got to know each other a little bit through ISFC, which is the International Stewardship or Sustainable Forest Coalition. But that's probably at the far end of everything that you do. Sort of, you run one of the largest paper mills globally, so, and you will have recognized that this is a very paper-based panel, so I'm sure you like that. What do you do in pulp and paper, and why are forests so important? I mean, as a McKinsey consultant, I would have come to you and I would have told you that markets are completely transactional. There is completely elastic supply. Stick to your core business and you buy everything out there. There's always enough forests, but that doesn't seem to be true anymore. So tell us the whole journey of how you look at that part of your business equation.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. We are OG Holdings right now. The company started as a OG paper company, which is roughly, it is 151 years ago. So we had a celebration last year, 150th anniversary last year, but we just after the Edo Tokugawa year, this company started. So that anyway, the first operation that we started was here in the Tokyo area. That raw material was using the old used clothes, which means that we started as a recycling company. And afterwards, we can't get so much used clothes, so that we went to a northern part of Japan, and the raw material was a wood trees. So then that was roughly 110 years ago, and from 100 years ago, a CEO of our OG paper, I think that time, said that the person those who use the trees must have the obligation or the responsibility to plant the trees. So that in these 100 years, we were cutting trees, but we were always planting the trees, and we are managing the forest healthy. And that's the business we were doing. And the forest itself, or the trees, are the sustainable materials, which is quite different from the fossil materials, which is only digging, and after so many years, maybe will be recycled. But regarding the trees, these hardwood trees could be used in 7 to 10 years' time. For the softwood trees, some of the pine trees can be used in 30 years. So that's the raw materials that we were using. And the reason why we need these forests is that it is to secure the raw material for our business. But the main part, the other part is that the forest has a lot of function, and it is the water source cultivation, soil protection, or the biodiversity issue. Some are used for the recreation. That's the lot of things the nature is, forest is providing. But the biggest headache right now is almost nobody is valuing this, or nobody knows about it, especially in Japan, I think. So that that's something that I do really want to emphasize here in this meeting also. And the other thing is that we are having a lot of forest, and that is one of the parties for the raw material, which means that it is the industrial plantation maybe, but the forest is not only our forest is not only those industrial forests. We have the conservation forest also, which is, if the forest is 100, roughly 40% is the conservation forest, and 60% is used for the raw material. So that's the kind of the forest management we are doing, and that from there, I think we are, and we believe that we are keeping the nature positive, not negative. So that's the way we are doing the business.
Now, isn't that an interesting framing of what you could be as a company, the ultimate bioeconomy company? So you don't have to spend much heartbeat over us going paperless as a society, and that market not offering much more growth. But you could say there's so many other things that we can do in the bioeconomy. And there's one way to have this conversation which is very deflating, where you say no one is really rewarding us for all the good things we do in the forest. No one is buying our carbon credits. No one is even starting to think of a biodiversity credits. No one is paying us for the water retention. But isn't there another way to think of it? We just had a flood in my country, which was a 36 billion loss and damage event. And about 2/3 of that event could have been avoided if the OGs of this world were making other land use choices in terms of how to manage a forest, how to manage land, agriculture. So in other words, there is so much value that we are creating through these land use choices, and there's so much you have to offer that in the end, we as a society will have to recognize this is perhaps worth more than pulp. So what is missing for us to get there faster?
Yeah, some of the disaster is also happening here in Japan, and I think it was in September that the northern part? No, the Ishikawa area. So the Japan seaside had a bigger landslide and a flooding issue. So that's coming from the heavy rainfall, especially in a short time of the period. But the other side is that also in the Kyushu area, there was some kind of a big damage in the landslide and others. But if the forest is healthily is managed, which means that if you keep the forest as it is for 100 or 200 years, the trees will get older, so that, and they are a living thing, so that if you do not do anything, the trees will fall. But if you keep the forest as, in the technical terms, some of the trees have to be thinning, which means that if there is 100 trees, some of the trees, 30 trees or something like that, should be taken out so that the forest will be kept healthy. That kind of thing is done by our forest management, so that will prevent those kind of disasters. So those are the things we want to do, and we are going to provide in Japan also.
So there seem to be lots of examples where we manage nature in a way that actually is consistent with our biodiversity, climate, and social commitments. That takes me back to, Charles, to you, to the ocean. Why are we making it so complicated? There are things out there that are attractive even today. So Mary and I just found out that we are both macro algae fans, seaweeds, that this is a really interesting new business proposition with many positive side effects, which should be economically viable even now, but it's still very hard to get that financed. Or another example that is in the ocean realm is MPAs, marine protected areas. If you run the analysis, the business case, by keeping one place safe, you are regenerating the fish stock so fast that overall it gives you a net positive result over your fishery. So it's a good investment. Every banker, if they look at the numbers, and if they didn't know this was an MPA, they would say, very interesting. Can I please get exposure? Can I please invest? But what is keeping us from making positive outcomes bankable?
Let me just come back briefly, if I can, to the example of blue carbon and to forest management in Japan, because there is a really interesting sort of ocean connection to that as well. And in Japan, fisheries commonly use forest management as a way of sustaining good water quality coming down into the ocean and thereby sustaining the fisheries. And this has been a long-standing practice in Japan, and I think that connection is a really interesting one. But when you look too at blue carbon, I mean, I was talking to a bank and financial institution yesterday here in Japan, and they said quite clearly that blue carbon was effectively their mitigation strategy, and that this was given the hard to abate economy in Japan as they saw it, the difficulty decarbonizing the economy, the difficulty decarbonizing their investments. They felt that investments in the blue carbon economy and the markets would be an interesting way for them to help offset their otherwise highly carbonized investments. And I think that that comes to the point that you were saying, Martin, that is that fundamentally blue carbon markets are much, much more than blue carbon themselves. They offer a range of other benefits that are quite fundamental to us. So obviously those benefits include the management of storm surges. If you were, for example, to invest in mangroves and seagrasses and so on and so forth, that would be an important benefit. The management of fisheries as well and the improvement of water quality. There are many, many co-benefits and nature-related co-benefits that are simply not sort of priced into the blue carbon market. They're not part of it. And I think the challenge here is to get nature onto the balance sheet in a way that it isn't there at the moment. And part of this is because there's a kind of ocean blindness, I would suggest, that is particularly prevalent in financial institutions and corporates that are looking to nature markets. That's one thing. The other thing is that there's a lot of challenges, I think, in addressing the data questions, in looking at what kind of benefits are real and how do you measure them? How do you make measurements that are understandable to financial institutions and to the kind of metrics and approaches that financial institutions use? It's about creating and underpinning that market with the right kind of both data as well as the regulatory frameworks as well as the enabling environments that allow nature to become an asset that is recognized and that is invested in. And at the moment, that simply isn't the case. We see it more on land, but less in the ocean. But there are many, many co-benefits. There are many examples, and MPAs is an extremely good example. What do MPAs do? Well, they provide ocean resilience, which is really, really important, but they have a direct set of benefits as well in ensuring, as we know, Enric Sala and many other people in the ocean space know, in building fish stocks that otherwise wouldn't have a chance to do so in areas where fish stocks have been depleted by overfishing, by industrial fishing. So, those things, again, are not really perceived as being, assets that are investable at this point in time. And I think we have to somehow move from the point where we are now, where investments, where these are not considered to be nature, not considered to be assets, to a point where we consider nature to be on the balance sheet, and we have metrics and opportunities to be able to measure and understand how that would be so.
Yeah, that already also takes us already in the hope section of these conversations. There are things that we didn't have in the past, and one of them is clearly technology that allows us to look at the real stocks of nature, the real benefits of nature in the way we can trust, and that is also consistent with our institutional or fiduciary mandates, because we can't make a bet. We have to be sure that these outcomes are there. But let me keep this for a short moment and revisit this question of, which is really also the homework we still have to deliver here. When does nature turn to value? I mean, there's one approach which is we just say it's intrinsic value, we can go as far as you and your community does merit, which is to give it legal personhood and to say, look, this is, we even take it out of the economic equation altogether. But then there are also ways in which we say nature is value because it protects us from these risks that are getting more and more striking, and we discussed that a bit. Then there is something, nature has value because it allows us to make good for the harm that we do otherwise. We call that compensation markets. But then there is something new which we are wrestling with here, which is that nature is a piece of infrastructure, or is not a piece, is the ultimate infrastructure that we need to run our societies. And isn't it interesting that we are reinvesting into any other category of infrastructure but not in nature? Although it basically is an asset where you put in money now and you get benefits later. And we even have instruments that allow us to do that technically. We call it nature asset companies. We call it landscape funds. We call it nature-based bonds or instruments. We call it securities. There's all of this happening. So technically, we even know how to deal with the problem, particularly when technology comes in, Charles, that you talked about. And we even have some early signals that governments are prepared to acknowledge that. Singapore gives you a tax break if you invest into assets. So it almost seems to be set up that this could be doable. What do we have to do now to make sure this happens on time?
So my perspective is this. There are a lot of people who talk about nature markets, theorize about nature markets, particularly from the academic community. There's a lot of scientists that have been working on it and creating frameworks, policy, informing international trade agreements, UN declarations, etc. But there are very few who have actually gone to the stage of implementation. And I truly believe one of the reasons why is there's this critical gap, and that gap is the lack of Indigenous participation, let alone the Indigenous voice. And I think that that's where Māori have proven that this can be a very viable market. We're one of the few that have been able to achieve a pledge of 50 million to establish our nature market, which really is centred around 10 million nature credits. And I would have loved to have explained how that market works. But this work that, this new project around the Pacific Whale Fund, and let me just correct some of my figures I gave you. 1 million whales based on the science that we're working with, spearheaded by the #1 marine scientist in the world, Dr. Carlos Duarte, is the equivalent of 1.7 million tonnes of carbon. We know that by reintroducing and bringing back our marine species, such as the great whales, many other species, we can double the capacity of the Pacific Ocean to be able to sequester and store carbon. We know a lot of that activity is happening in Antarctica, but also throughout the Pacific, you know, there is one ocean. And so our attempt here is to focus on using traditional Indigenous customary marine protections called rahui across a 20 million square kilometre area, which is essentially 3 EEZs: New Zealand, Tonga, the Cook Islands, and French Polynesia. That would be the equivalent of, you know, just about 12% of the entire Pacific Ocean. So half of the 30 by 30 goals that are needed for the whole region, which is why this plan that we're focused on to restore marine species, to undertake the science that's needed to create nature credits, which focused on marine life, is very innovative. No one has done that yet. We've focused on terrestrial systems. We've focused on the easy ecosystems because science can measure it. But now it's time to go beyond that. This is a real plan for the whole Pacific. We believe it could anchor the blue economy. It's the missing piece. It's going to give us that ability to have hope that we can, try and stabilise global temperatures. And people right now will think this idea is crazy, but in 10 years' time, once we've been able to achieve significant investment into the science needed to be able to show the carbon sequestration of our marine mammals, then we can have a viable nature market based on marine mammals. Now, how amazing would that be? And Japan would be very, very well positioned for this, particularly given you need offsets. Well, we in the Pacific, island nations, who are your cousins, by the way, we are all related, we offer that opportunity. And so my work is really about connecting that global capital to us in the Pacific. What's not happening in our region right now is the legislative frameworks, particularly in fragile island states, not necessarily the islands that I'm working with. They don't even have carbon markets. So that is why we've introduced this very holistic approach, couched under the term of whale legal personhood. It would not only protect the whale, but actually enable nature markets. And the way it will achieve that is by seeing the whale as the natural asset. You know, a natural asset which the IMF has already valued a few years ago, so it's actually increased the value of the whale to $2 million. Now imagine if you've got a population like Tonga of at least 3,000 humpbacks, suddenly you can convert those 3,000 humpbacks times 2, you know, that's millions of dollars added to their balance sheet. So in terms of the hope that we have for this plan, it couldn't be done a few years ago. Why? Because the technology hadn't arrived. Now the technology is here. Now the markets are here. The technology will allow us to monitor marine life every minute of the day. There are new constellations coming which will enable remote sensing of our marine space. So, our vision really is to ensure that the Pacific and the countries of the Pacific don't get left behind, and also to ensure that these settings will enable the quick deployment of resources. We actually already have the science, a lot of science. We have the policy settings. We will soon have the legal settings. What we need now is rapid deployment of resources. And that's the part, at least, that our project, the Hinemonahalo project, has achieved. But this Pacific Whale Fund project represents an even bigger market opportunity. So I hope that the scientists in this room might want to become part of that. And certainly if there's individuals who want to invest into nature markets, invite you to do so and to come into this space.
Thanks, Mary. That's exactly the kind of vibe that I wanted to get into this conversation. So when we meet again in 10 years' time, you're saying there will be island communities that are holding the whales and their natural capital richness on their balance sheet with all the benefits, better incomes, but also they are a more interesting partner in global financial markets because they have something to offer and they're offering low risks. And on the other hand, those who put money into it, they can hold it on their balance sheet because they have made investment into something that is valuable for them in the future. So that's an exciting vision. Isono-san, what's your vision in 10 years' time? Describe your company in 10 years' time, what role it will play in a global bioeconomy where we have woken up to this challenge.
Yeah, so maybe coming back to your former question, what's missing, and it may relate to what's going to happen in the next 10 years' time. But we have calculated what the nature value is from our domestic forest, which is a little bit less than 200,000 hectares. And we have announced that is roughly around 3.5 billion to 4 billion US dollar per year for our forest. But right now, nobody's too much. But most of the people are not valuing this 3.5 or the 4 billion US dollar value of the nature, and that's including the person who are the stock analysts who are covering our industry, and they were just saying that how much that will be on the balance sheet or the PL, how much profit you will make from this nature or something like that. So still, it's more like a non-financial disclosure issue, but I think that may not be working, so that there's some kind of a global standard of this nature calculation should be needed. And the one of the things is that it's not only our paper company, but also the other forest owners are thinking the same thing. And that's coming back to the Martin's introduction to me, that we have formed the ISFC last year. And as a whole forest owners, we are working together if we can make some kind of a rule for this kind of a nature calculation. And if we can do that, and with some other parties who are interested in this accounting system, we may be able to make some kind of a global standard. And that, if that happens, the price of the nature could be put on the price of the product. So that's what we were aiming in the next 5 to 10 years' time.
Charles, in 10 years' time, what will we be discussing at the World Ocean Summit?
Well, I hope nature. I hope nature in all its glory, because we do not do enough of that. And I am inspired by Mary's example and by Ono-san's example of this. I mean, it's a journey, isn't it? We are just right at the beginning of the nature discussion. We're looking at the risks, the dependencies, the impacts. Even that related to the ocean is a long way behind it is on land and where it needs to be. But we need to start thinking of the other side of it, of the opportunity, of the innovation that Miri and groups like hers are bringing in. And indeed, I think importantly, I think we need to start thinking about the overarching governance frameworks and enabling frameworks that will allow this to happen. The market is not going to move quickly enough, in my view, to do it on its own. It is going to have much greater intervention by regulation, by, I think interestingly in the early discussion today, about a broader sense of the planetary commons and about a broader sense of the bigger issues that need to be addressed as well. At the moment, we simply aren't getting that buy-in at the level that we need it. And without that, I don't think the market can move quickly enough, even though it is certainly beginning to move.
Yeah, so nature already is on our balance sheet scientifically, emotionally, so let's please get it on our balance sheet economically. Thanks a lot.